Union Fashion employs a consistent API lifecycle across all of the APIs it's developing. This API lifecycle uses the APIs from these infrastructure providers to deliver across each of these stops of the API lifecycle, from define all the way down to deprecation. This is all defined as a Postman collection with 216 individual requests spread across these stops along the API lifecycle. You can go ahead and see this collection. It's available as a Run in Postman button and available as Postman documentation for you to browse and reverse engineer and play with. It's a proof of concept, but it does work. But it's not proven for production or for helping people get up and going without a lot of assistance. So the API collection begins with defining the base platform for delivering each API. We have to quantify the workspace we're working in, because when you're working within Postman, it doesn't you don't have any way of referencing the workspace that you're working in. So we need to set that. We need to define the GitHub organization. We're using Union Fashion here on GitHub. And then we need to make sure that a repository has been set up for each individual API, requiring each API to have its own repository set up. Then using Postman, we can manage the Open API definition here. And then this Open API definition can be pulled in from the Postman API. It stores it here in the Postman, the products API lifecycle for the API we're working on, keeping track of all the details of the stops along this API lifecycle, but also what API we're working with, making it so that we can use this Open API definition across many different stops without having to make a call to the Postman API to get it from the platform. So this puts it in the environment and makes it so that the products API lifecycle environment has everything it needs to execute across these stops. So using that, we can then design an API. We have a handful of components available to us. We can mock APIs, create a development or a production mock server, as well as some maintenance requests to manage those mock servers. We can deploy a database, a simple NoSQL database using AWS DynamoDB. We can do backups and restore list tables. We can create new tables. We can also create more complex relational data stores, managing instances, managing the logs, tagging, and restoring databases across Amazon RDS. We can also deploy scripts or functions as AWS Lambda for use as the compute behind each API. We can also use Amazon S3 for our heavy object storage, creating buckets and managing objects for each individual API. We can deploy code in a repeatable way using GitHub Actions as our pipeline. And then we can deploy API definitions to AWS API Gateway, deploying them to different development staging or production environments. We can then manage each individual API using by making sure there's usage plans. We have full control over the different stages involved, and then there are keys for accessing each API, allowing us to track the usage for each consumer behind each API. We can centrally log and track all the activity across our APIs, manage encryption and DNS, and then make sure everything is published. Documentation's been published to a portal, and there's discovery and a README updated for each individual API. We can make sure contract testing is in place, performance testing, as well as security scanning and making sure the proper security areas are set up. Next, we can make sure that we have monitors in place for monitoring the different collections for contract testing, performance, and security testing, and then manage support using GitHub issues for our changelog, our roadmap, and managing open issues and tickets. Also handling communication, publishing to a blog, publishing to Twitter, because this is Union Fashion, it is very open. We will be communicating about every change as it happens. And then a set of analytics helping us keep in tune with some of the existing outputs across all of these infrastructure providers. All the way to deprecation when we're actually ready to deprecate an API. We have the tools here to set our headers and start planning accordingly. And then the last is some reporting that'll basically actually give us some reports using the visualizer. That one publishes it to GitHub. Let's actually visualize it using test scripts. We can visualize the outline for this life cycle and how much of it we've implemented across the standardized API lifecycle we set up. So this is all reverse engineerable. The scripts aren't 100% production ready. They're pretty hacky at this point. But the API lifecycle demonstrates how you can define an API lifecycle, document it using Postman documentation, and then provide a collection that can move each API forward across this lifecycle in a consistent way. It's not next we're going to apply it to a handful of other APIs, the order API, the baskets API, the search, and the users, to further harden this. And then once we're ready, we're going to play with an Azure implementation for the database, the compute, the storage, and the deployment management layer. This will all be done at Azure as well as Amazon, allowing us to realize a kind of multi-cloud part of this. But next is to further refine this and apply this lifecycle collection against more APIs, and further make it easier to onboard with the collection itself, as well as applying it to different APIs, reducing the friction and making it smoother and easier to work with. But you're welcome to reverse engineer, play with it, look at the scripts, think about the concepts, and then ask questions via GitHub issues for Union Fashion Home. We'll be developing and evolving all of the APIs as well as the overall lifecycle here by mapping it out and making sure we're adding different sections and evolving it in a sensible way.